What's up, everyone? My name is Forsaken, and today we are going to make something awesome. So, we'll start with the fact that I am a creative person, but I am not very good at all. You could say that I suck, in fact, at freehand drawing. Symmetry is just, it's almost a myth at this point as far as my experience with the world is in regards to the implementation of it. When I see the people on Reddit that draw these masterpieces or these photorealistic paintings, it might as well be magic as far as I'm concerned. So this is my workaround. I took a screenshot of the skull that I wanted to use, and I am making an overlay that I will then print out and use that as my template for the image. At this stage, it's okay if the image is a little rough because we're going to transfer it to wood, and then once it's on the board, we'll finalize the image there. In the end, filling the skull in really wasn't necessary. I hadn't thought of it at the time. An outline of the parts that are going to be cut out is all you really need. And in the end, that's what I got because my printer was almost out of ink, so I just get this ghosted outline of the image. This template is actually glued down with normal school grade Elmer's glue. It does the job, and it doesn't make the remnants of the paper left too difficult to remove later. The glue is dried between these shots, and this packaging tape may or may not be necessary, but I saw a video once on YouTube of somebody making a sign and they taped their template down like this. So it's just a precaution because I would hate later to be routing out the image and my template to go flying off or doing something wonky. When I'm using a router on a project, this is the way I like to hold it in place. Just a couple strips of 1/8 inch plywood screwed to my table. There are probably better ways to do it, safer, more professional ways, but this gets the job done very nicely. And it works if you have a sacrificial table like I do. You don't worry about it being damaged. Which reminds me of something very important. Disclaimer time. I am not very experienced with these tools. I am not to be held as an example on how to properly use them or how to properly implement shop safety. This shit is dangerous. Just be careful, take your time, and research your proper usage method beforehand. If you commit seppuku with a skill saw, I don't want to hear about it. Just always make sure eye protection and hearing protection for certain, without a doubt, even if you forsake everything else. I don't know. I suppose you can have a philosophical discussion whether or not you would rather be deaf or blind. I suppose I would prioritize my sight in that situation. But either way, a dust mask is recommended as well. The first pass was done with a 1/4 inch bit. The smaller diameter makes it a lot easier to stay on your line. This pass is done with a 1/2 inch bit, I believe. This is just to clear out an area to make it easier to see when I am cutting the skull out of this board. This is a 1/8 inch bit, I believe. This is just to do the finer detailed sections because This is pine. Like, I have a chisel, it's fairly sharp, but with pine, a lot of times, since it's so soft, the fibers are more likely to crush than they are to cut. I'm sure some of you are like, hey, wouldn't it have been a lot easier and saved you a lot of time if you would use your bandsaw from the start? Well, the problem is this project has spanned so much time. I actually did not have the bandsaw when I started this. So, oh well. I got to demonstrate my sick router skills. Here I'm using a roundover bit to put a radius on the edges to give it a better profile. You could do this with sandpaper, but it would probably take you quite a while, and you wouldn't be able to get it consistent. I'm going to cut the letters out of a sheet of 1/8" plywood. I love this stuff, especially because you can buy it on sheets that are 2 foot by 4 foot. It fits in my car easily. I don't have a way to transport full sheets. But once again, just plain school grade Elmer's glue. It was far more difficult than I expected to keep my hand from blocking the workpiece. Now, here we see the benefit using a scroll saw, because a scroll saw has a short blade that oscillates back and forth. So you can drill a hole in a workpiece and cut out a center without crossing across the image that you want to remain. It's a little finicky and a bit of a hassle to do it, but it's a very nice feature. I couldn't have done the job without it. You may not have been able to see, but that is a 320 grit sandpaper. It's a high grit just used to smooth over edges and make it a little more pleasant to touch and prepping it for being painted. The rough spots you can see, which was the line between where my saw cut it and I routed it out. I'll have to go over those with a 160 grit and then back over them again with the 320. The most important thing really here is softening all the hard edges that I didn't get when I used my round over bit, particularly the eye sockets, because they would be pretty hard to look at if I just left a 90 on them. I use this stuff called gesso, I believe that's how it's pronounced. What I use it for is to seal wood, to prepare it for taking paint, specifically acrylic paint. It will work for spray paint as well, but they have cans of spray paint primer. What it does is it prevents the pores in the wood from absorbing the paint that you put over top of it. It keeps the surface consistent, so you don't have spots where the finish changes, where one spot may look more matte than another, whereas another may look more glossy because the matte one, part of the paint has been absorbed into the wood. This also has the effect of sealing the wood grain, filling the wood grain rather, so that it doesn't look that it has that texture of wood. This stuff, I don't record me mixing it, but what you do is you put it into a plastic cup and you take like a palette knife or something, or a brush or a spoon. I mean, anything would work, but you probably wouldn't want to use a spoon. And you add a little bit of warm water and you mix it, and you want to get it to the consistency of like thin pancake batter. You can make it thicker, but then you have the problem of it keeping the brush strokes in, and then that has to be sanded down. If you know anything about woodworking, you would know that the proper way to do this would be to cut what's called a rabbet in these boards that make the frame. So that way this backing is recessed into it and it looks, a lot better. It looks more professional because you can't see the backing board from the side, and if you see it from the back, everything's sitting flush. Unfortunately, my camera stopped recording when I spray painted these. So that was just a can of flat white spray paint that put over top of the gesso that was dried and sanded that I put on there previously. I sanded with like 320 sandpaper just to get the rough edges off it so it's nice and smooth. These do receive a second coat of spray paint, so it's really important to make sure you wipe off the dust from the sanding before, or the surface is going to be very rough. This is what the gesso looks like straight out of the container. It has to be thinned out considerably. Originally, when I glued the frame together, there was some shifting. So in the corners where the miter joints are, there are high spots that I have to chisel down and then sand smooth. Then the whole thing gets a general sanding before it gets primered and painted. After receiving 2 coats of gesso with sandings after each, it gets a final coat of a white, heavy body acrylic. You always want to use a fast-drying super glue in applications like this. Once again, my camera stopped recording. I don't know what causes it to do this, but it'll just record for a few minutes and stop. So it's obvious what I did. As I get the footage of it. You know, it looks a little rough up close because the wood itself isn't exactly uniformly smooth. So there's a lot of, divots and things that kind of prevent me from really getting a crisp line painted on it. Either way, you can't see it once it's up on the wall really to know the difference. Also, I end up gluing this down about 1/4 inch off center. It might not be apparent, but it irritates the piss out of me. The more I looked at it after it was finished, I really felt that there was too much space on the sides of the skulls, so I added a little something. The dice logo and PTFO. If you play the game, you know what it stands for. Play the fucking objective. And with that, it is essentially finished. I have to paint the back and put some hardware on it so it can be hung on the wall. I really wish that the Battlefield franchise had a more iconic emblem, something that you knew what it represented. Something cooler than me just pulling the skull from the death screen. I had to elevate it like this because the skull sticks out further than everything else and it wouldn't have been stable. I'm just using 2 sawtooth hangers that you can get at whatever home center you shop at. They're held in with just 2 little nails. And the plywood backing that I'm using, you can typically push it in through the top layer of veneer and they'll stay standing. So there's no way you can hold them with your fingers and hit them at the same time. If you managed to sit through this whole video, I know it's a long one again, but thank you. I want to keep building things like this. I want to keep increasing the complexity of the images. It just depends on what games are coming out and what their emblems are and if they're iconic or if they may be too complex. But thank you. Please like, subscribe, all that. Pat yourself on the back because you made it to the end. I hope to see you next time.